Hi, this is Corey Reeser providing a reflection on this week's reading for Reaching and Teaching Students in Poverty, chapters 7 through 10. So I first want to focus on the concept of the ineffective education that is provided for students in poverty. So what the author identifies is basically what I took away from it was this culture of, as the author identifies, persuasive education reform, and it's this concept of basically implementing constant educational reforms and educational policies that are meant to address systematic failures within the institution of education itself. And this can be a problem because with all of these policies and reforms that are being implemented, they don't necessarily take into account students who are in poverty, and they don't necessarily implement measures to provide access to the students who necessarily wouldn't have the availability of certain educational tools. And I wanted to focus on charter schools. This is one of the ineffective strategies that the author identifies. I personally don't like charter schools for some of the reasons as the author outlines in the chapter. My personal beliefs are that charter schools create a aura of inequality, and as the author identifies, they oftentimes desegregate themselves or basically they segregate themselves in a way that are oftentimes more segregated than the public schools themselves, and you can have access or greater access to education and educational tools at the charter school, and then right across the street at the public institution, those same students don't have the same access or the same availability of educational tools, tutors, and different basically strategies that the school incorporates. So this is a very big problem, and I don't think personally that this is the medicine for the disease of failing schools and basically unequal access to education. So effective instructional strategies, I wanted to focus on 3, 4, and 5 that the author listed. The first is adopting higher order, student-centered, rigorous pedagogies. And this is important because especially if you're working at a Title I school where you have a lot of students that come from impoverished backgrounds, it's important to adopt a high level of educational rigor that they should meet, but it has to be student-centered. This is very important because if it's teacher-centered or it doesn't reflect the student's background or the student's understanding of the content material, they're far less likely to actually retain and understand the content material you're trying to communicate. Incorporating movement and exercise into classroom learning, from my experience in a social studies classroom, so from the perspective of economics and political science, I find it very advantageous to incorporate activities that involve collaboration, or else the students won't be engaged in the content material that I'm trying to communicate. It's very archaic and it's very teacher-centered. So by incorporating these cooperative policies and a cooperative curriculum, I'm able to enhance the learning environment of my classroom. And this basically moves into making the curriculum relevant to low-income students. And this is important because most of the time the textbooks and the adopted state curriculum doesn't necessarily reflect the experiences of low-income students, and they don't understand much of the vocabulary that is used, especially in American government and economics. So it's important to make the content relevant to their own upbringing and their own personal background. And I liked the quote in the middle. It says, if a curriculum does not respond to a culture, then the culture won't respond to the curriculum. And this basically reflects the fifth concept that the author identifies. Relational strategies are also important. They're important, in my opinion, because they remove stereotypes. I found this painting online, and it basically identifies this guy pulling, it looks like stickers that say stereotypes off of his arm. And in my opinion, constant engagement and interactivity with students can help you remove some of the stereotypes that any teacher would bring into a classroom that they're not familiar with. In my personal experience, I come from an affluent background in San Luis Obispo County. So when I went into Chaffey, which was a Title I urban school with a lot of working class families, by immersing myself in the school itself, by volunteering extra hours, and now that I'm a swim coach, it has greatly impacted my ability to walk into a classroom setting and either be able to quickly remove a stereotype that I may have, or walk into a classroom setting and not have a stereotype at all. And this is all due to basically my interactions that I've had with my students inside and outside of the classroom, along with their parents and extracurricular activities that they're involved with. Spheres of influence are also important. The author identifies Initiative 1 to advocate for universal preschool. I personally think that this should be a mandatory element of any industrialized country. If you look at Europe, they have basically, it's standard within all European countries, universal preschool, and this is important because it helps develop the children's educational abilities at a young age when their brain is still developing. And the problem with this in America is you have a certain class of citizen that is able to pay for and has access to universal preschool because they have the monetary or asset ability to access that specific educational tool for their children, whereas students in urban areas coming from backgrounds of low-income households, they don't have the ability to pay for that. So the preschool program in America is basically pay to play, and if you have the financial ability to provide that education to your child, then you are able to do it. And that's where the gross inequality exists in preschool education, is that it basically, I mean, if you're poor, your child will be far less, their abilities will be far behind students who had access to preschool because they've had that development in education at least 1 to 2 years before the students who didn't have access to that same educational tool. And then Initiative 2 is creating relationships with community agencies and organizations. Now this is important because as a teacher, it shows the students and the families of those students that you're involved in the community and you care about the lives of your students. So by simply showing up to class, providing instruction, and leaving, especially me being a white teacher in a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood, it shows that I'm actually involved and care about the community, whereas in a lot of circumstances, white teachers, they drop into the community, teach, and then they jump back out and basically go back into their white neighborhood, and that doesn't reflect the community they teach in. So by developing relationships with students, and in my own experience, I've actually started as a swim coach, and I'm trying to get a spot coaching water polo. This shows that I'm much more involved in the lives of my students, and I'm trying to take in a more active role in participating and attending activities that my students are involved with outside of the classroom. So this basically just shows my commitment to the students, and this actually has been reciprocated by the students I teach because they see my involvement and they want to put forth that much effort because they know I care about them personally. So this is my Ed Talk for the April 5th reading on chapters 6 through 7 of Teaching Students in Poverty.